Okay, great. Oh, thank you. Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Gitta Neufeld. I'm a little cold, which is why I'm standing like this. Hopefully, I'll warm up as I speak. I'm honored and a little bit scared to be here today. I'm honored because I think this Tanakh study concept is something that we should really, really be very, very proud of. I can proudly say that I remember having the initial discussions with Jesse on Mirpeset and Alon Shvut about how to do this type of a program. And I'm a little scared because one of my teachers is sitting right here, Rabbi Yitzchak Et Shalom. So if I make mistakes, just ignore them. Be nice to me. Yeah, okay. I'd also like to dedicate this session to the memory of Mrs. Sarah Sultan, Sarah Bat Yulia, Jesse's grandmother, who passed away this year. And if you know anything about the Sultan and the Salem families, they got there because of Grandma, and I think that it's really a tribute to her that her children and her grandchildren continue with a love of Torah that she definitely imbued with them. So I was going to start off this class a little bit differently, and then I read an article in the Washington Post. And the title of the article was, As France Deals with the New Normal, and it goes on to talk about what happened in Nice. And it was a very sad paragraph. The whole story is sad. The situation in the world today is sad. But there was a very sad paragraph. And to me, it pointed out what we're doing here today. After the January 2015 attacks at Charlie Hebdo and other nearby sites, in which Islamist militants killed 17 people, about 3 million people took part in unity marches across France, including more than 40 world leaders who linked their arms in a show of solidarity. 17 people killed, 3 million people actively demonstrating about this. At a rally on Friday at the Place de la République, excuse my French, I took Spanish, a famed square in Paris, only about 200 mourners turned up to remember the victims of the Nice attack. 200 people, 80-something people killed, 200 people show up. Terrorism has become the new normal. And what I want us to ask ourselves today is our situation now without a Beit Hamikdash, is that the new normal? Is that something that's okay? So for 3 weeks or 9 days, depending on what ethnicity you are, I won't go to weddings, I won't listen to music, I'll have to eat dairy, I'm not such a fan of pasta. And, at a wedding, at some point, they'll stop and the joy will stop for a moment and we'll say, Yemesh Kacher. And when I had the interior decorator come in and talk about painting my house, he thought I was crazy that we left that little piece open over the door. But is it the new normal that, okay, been there, done that, let's move on, we have a nice life living here? Or is it that we need to go back to what the old normal was? Why are we, in fact, fasting today? What is it, not only today, but this 3-week period, which we call Bein HaMitzarim, between the narrow places? What is it about them that we need to change to get out of that narrow place? So I think what we have to do is think about what it is that we've lost. And there's a very interesting custom, and most people just skip it at the beginning of the Siddur. But if you look at the beginning of the Siddur, you have Birkot HaShachar, the morning blessings, and then after that there's a section called, the parts you skip, Tikkun Chatzot. What's Tikkun Chatzot? Some people do say it. Tikkun Chatzot is a Kabbalistic, it has its Kabbalistic origins, and I am not a Kabbalist, but that much I do know. The text that we have was composed or consolidated by the Ari HaKadosh, and there's something called Tikkun Rachel and Tikkun Leah. And it's prayers of mourning over the destruction of the temple. And in fact, the introductory instructions say, during the second half of the night, Hashem especially remembers the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash and the exile of the Jewish people. That time is therefore an auspicious one to pray for the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash and the redemption of the Jewish people. Therefore, all men should mourn and cry over these matters and recite Tikkun Chatzot, a prayer arranged specifically for this purpose. Great is the reward for those who do so every night. So every day, during the night time, which is emotionally a darker time for people usually, you should stop and think about the Beit HaMikdash. And surprisingly, Tikkun Chatzot is comprised of 2 sections, Tikkun Rachel and Tikkun Leah. What do Rachel and Leah, 2 of our matriarchs, have to do with the Beit HaMikdash, with the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And it's interesting because the Gaon of Vilna is quoted as having said that the first temple was Leah and the second temple is Rachel. Okay, if I have two of something, we like to make associations. So there's two of this. Why couldn't they be Moshe and Aaron? Why couldn't they be Mordechai and Esther? What is it, Leah and Rachel, that have to do with these two temples? And let's see what is it about them that we are missing today that we need to try to restore. So what's the difference? They're both wives of Yaakov, both holy women. What's the difference between Leah and Rachel? What's the difference? Rachel is the wife that Yaakov wanted to have. He worked for her. He thought he was working for her for 7 years. He ends up working for her for, Sophie, how many years? 14 years. Okay, she is really the essence of his relationship. How about his relationship with Leah? Sinuah, she was hated, okay, well, or despised or less liked. But how did he enter into that relationship? Did he work to have that relationship with her? No, she was literally handed to him under wraps on a silver platter. He just got this wife. It was a gift, in quotes, okay, unexpected, okay? He didn't even know that he was getting her. Now let's think about that in terms of our relationship. We know many, many times, I hate being tethered, many times in Tanakh, the relationship between the Jewish people and God is symbolized by the relationship between a husband and a wife. So let's think about how the relationship between Yaakov and Leah relates to the first temple, and the relationship between Yaakov and Rachel relates to the second temple. The first relationship, the Leah relationship, was very passive. Nobody had anything to do with it. The relationship happened to Yaakov. How was our relationship with God in the first temple a passive one? Anybody have any ideas? Lise? Right, we were told, we went, we did, and not only that, God showed up. Shlomo prayed, he said, Ba'avur David Abdecha, God showed up and he stayed. It didn't really depend on what was happening. It was a very passive type of thing. God came down and came to visit and stayed for about 400 years, okay? And if I were to characterize my need for a relationship with Hashem, I would say I could go to the Beit HaMikdash, watch what was going on, and come back inspired. For all of us who are not Kohanim or Leviim, right? Go there, be there, and come back home. However, the second Beit HaMikdash, was God's presence manifest? Was the Shekhinah manifest during the second temple? Not really. That's the beginning. There was a little bit, but really, it's characterized by that lack of Shekhinah. In fact, if we read the descriptions of the two dedications, of the two different dedications of the Beit HaMikdash, which you don't have on your source sheet, okay, the first temple is described. We're told, as Lisa said, that Shlomo built it, and there was this beautiful ceremony, and everybody's rejoicing. And at the end of the dedication, in chapter 8 of Melachim, we're told, "Vayizbach Shlomo et zevach hashlamim asher zavach laHashem," and Shlomo offers all these sacrifices. How many? Bakar 22,000, 22,000 oxen, v'tzol 120,000, and 120,000 sheep. That's a lot of barbecue. At the dedication of the second Beit HaMikdash, guess what they offer? And they offer, it's written in Aramaic in the book of Ezra, to the dedication of this house of God, Torin Me'ah, 100 oxen. Dichrin Matayim, 200 rams. Imrin Arba Me'ah, 400 lambs. Okay, Utzvirei Izeh L'Chata'al Kol Yisrael, and as a sin offering, Trei Asar, 12 little goats. So much smaller, so much less of an excitement, so much less. In fact, we're told that when the second Beit HaMikdash was consecrated, there were people that cried. There were people that rejoiced. There were people that cried. The people who were crying, why did they cry? Because they remembered the glory of the Shekhinah being manifest at the first temple, which they no longer had today. But the second Beit HaMikdash came about because if we wanted to have the Shekhinah, if we wanted to feel God's presence, I couldn't just go and see this miraculous thing. I needed to work at it and to feel that I'm trying to achieve a relationship with God, just as Yaakov had to work for Rachel in order to be able to achieve that relationship. Let's look a little bit deeper. We know, we're told in Pirkei Avot, on your source sheets, there will not be a test, but I like source sheets. Okay, on your source sheets, the first source, Mishnah Avot, okay, there were 10 miracles that happened in the Beit HaMikdash. Those 10 miracles happened in the first Beit HaMikdash. Very interesting, things that you would think would be normal occurrences that did not happen. We know that, for example, lo ipila isha mereach basar kodesh, a woman would not miscarry because of the smell of the meat. A woman, we know traditionally that if a woman is pregnant and she wants to eat something, we feed her even if it's kippur, because God forbid she should have a miscarriage. But what would happen if she smelled the meat of a korban and said, I want to eat that? A woman, she's not supposed to be eating from that korban. We're worried she's going to have a miscarriage. Don't worry, no woman, that never happened to any woman. The meat never spoiled, they were never seen, never flawed. We'll go through one of the miracles a little bit later. But there were all these things that seemed to transcend the normal rules of nature that were happening during the first Beit HaMikdash. What was the purpose of coming to the Beit HaMikdash? We're going to read it in a few weeks. We read in the story in the law of Maaser, when you give your Maaser, when you bring your tithe to the Beit HaMikdash to eat it, why do we have to go to the Beit HaMikdash? I bolded it for you. L'man tilmad lirat Hashem Elokecha kol hayamim. So that you will learn to fear God. Fear does not mean to be scared. It means to have reverence, to be in awe of Hashem. So you would go to the Beit HaMikdash, you would see all these wonderful things happening, it would change you emotionally, and you would go home with that sense of inspiration. You felt it. So what went wrong? Why was that Beit HaMikdash destroyed? On Tisha B'Av, the Haftarah, we're going to read source number 3. Okay, Yirmiyahu Navi, the prophet of the destruction, says, Mi ha'isha chacham v'yaven et zot. Who's the wise man who can understand this? V'asher diber pi Hashem elav v'yageda. Or the one who God spoke to him that he can tell me. Al ma avda ha'aretz. Why was the land destroyed? Yirmiyahu Navi asks, why was the land destroyed? And he's waiting for an answer. What was the reason for the destruction of the first temple? And God is the one who answers. Vayomer Hashem, al azvam et torati, because they abandoned my Torah. Sounds good. They were no longer religious. They don't deserve a Beit HaMikdash. Let's destroy it. But the Gemara looks at it a little bit differently and says, Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Mai dichtiv mi ha'isha chacham v'yaven et zot, etc., 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 etc. Davar ze amru chachamim v'lo pirshuhu. They asked the rabbis, they said, why was the earth destroyed? Why was the land destroyed? And the rabbis didn't know. Okay, amru nevi'im v'lo pirshuhu. They asked the prophets, and they said, we don't know. Wait a second. If I'm not keeping mitzvot, the rabbis couldn't tell that I was getting into my car on Saturday and driving off to have a cheeseburger? They couldn't tell that? The Nevi'im, prophets, didn't know that I'm not keeping the Torah? Okay, so it's a little strange. Until God explained it himself, and God answered, that they abandoned my Torah. But I don't get it. Wouldn't they have known it? So then Rav Yehuda explains it. And he says, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Shelo birchu b'Torah tchila. They didn't make a blessing before the Torah. We know that in Birkot HaShachar, in the morning blessings, one of the things that we say is the brachot on learning Torah, before we learn Torah. Same question, though. The rabbis couldn't tell that they were skipping 4 pages, and there was no Siddur, but that they weren't saying it. The Nevi'im, the prophets, didn't know it. What does it mean when you say they didn't make a blessing on the Torah? And I think we have to think about what a bracha is. What is a blessing? When we say Baruch Atah Hashem, etc., 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 what are we doing? Gratitude. It's gratitude. We are connecting to, we're realizing that this did not come from me, this came from the one above. Whatever it is came from the one above. Very interesting. The word for grafting on a tree, if you graft one thing onto another, lahavrich. Okay, so you're connecting, you're creating a connection between yourself and God. I'm going to go off my script for a minute because I tried not to do too many stories. There's a Hasidic tale. Okay, there was a Rebbe and his Chassid, and they're both sitting there and they're having an apple. And they both, before you eat an apple, what bracha do you make? Borei pri ha'etz, right? So they both sit down with their apples and they both bite into the apple. And the Chassid says to the rabbi, look at that, rabbi, we made the same bracha. And the rabbi says, excuse me, you made a bracha so that you could eat. I'm eating the apple so that I can make a bracha. Okay, why am I'm taking this physical experience of eating and I'm using it, I'm elevating it, I'm using it to create a relationship between myself and God. So when they say, Al Shalom Berchu B'Torah Tchila, what I want to suggest to you, and the Bach says this, so I'm not suggesting it independently, is that it means that they didn't appreciate what they were doing as a spiritual experience. They knew all the rules, they knew all the laws, they knew exactly how big that drug has to be and how high the schach has to be and what the sound of the shofar has to be and anything else you want to say. But they were doing it either because of mechanical execution. I need to know how to do it right. They couldn't see that forest of a relationship with God because of all the trees that they were busy being involved in, or because they just pursued it as an end for itself, an intellectual endeavor for themselves. And I think once you're doing that, there's no purpose to the Beit HaMikdash. There's no purpose if you don't see this as an opportunity for a relationship to pursue and to create a relationship with Hashem. There's no reason for that Beit HaMikdash to continue to exist. Parenthetically, if anyone hasn't read this article, I will suggest to you to go home and Google it. I have one copy here. It's called To Everything a Blessing. It's an article that was written by a world-class pulmonologist, Kenneth Prager. He is the chief of medical ethics at Columbia Presbyterian. And I'll just read you the highlights, but you should read the whole article. When I was an elementary school student in yeshiva, I'm skipping where he explains. This article appeared in the Journal of the American Medical Association, so he explains all the Hebrew terms. I'm going to skip that. When I was an elementary school student in yeshiva, my classmates and I used to find amusing a sign that was posted just outside the bathroom. It was an ancient Jewish blessing, commonly referred to as the Asher Yatzar benediction, that was supposed to be recited after one relieved oneself. For grade school children, there could be nothing more strange or ridiculous than to link these acts with holy names, with holy words that mention God's names. Blessings are reserved for prayers, for holy days, or for thanking God for food or for some act of deliverance, but surely not for a bodily function that evoked smirks and giggles. Then he describes the origin of the bracha, and then he says, it was not until my second year of medical school that I first began to understand the appropriateness of this short prayer. Pathophysiology brought home to me the terrible consequences of even minor aberrations in the structure and the function of the human body. At the very least, I began to no longer take for granted the normalcy of my trips to the bathroom. Instead, I started to realize how many things had to operate just right for these minor interruptions of my daily routine to run smoothly. I thought of Abaye and of bracha. I recalled my days at yeshiva and remembered how silly that sign outside the bathroom had seemed. But after seeing patients whose lives revolved around their dialysis machines and others with colostomies and catheters, I realized how wise the rabbi had been. And then it happened, I began to recite the bracha. At first, I had to go back to my siddur to get the text right. With repetition, and there are many opportunities for you to get to know this blessing, I could recite it fluently and with sincerity and understanding. Over the years, reciting the bracha had become for me an opportunity to offer thanks not just for the proper functioning of my excretory organs, but also for my overall good health. And then he goes on to talk about it. And then there's a final piece that I want to read to you. There was one unforgettable patient whose story reinforced the truth and beauty of the Asher Yatzar for me forever. Josh was a 20-year-old student who sustained an unstable fracture of his third and fourth cervical vertebrae in a motor vehicle crash. He nearly died from his injury and required emergency intubation and ventilatory support. He was initially totally quadriplegic, but for weak flexion of his right biceps. Imagine, the only thing he could do is move his right biceps. A long and difficult period of stabilization and rehabilitation followed. There were promising signs of recovery over the first few months that came suddenly and unexpectedly. Movement of a finger here, flexion of a toe there, return of sensation here, adduction of a muscle group there. With incredible courage, hard work, and an excellent physical therapist, Josh improved day by day. In time, and after what seemed like a miracle, he was able to walk slowly with a leg brace and a cane. But Josh continued to require intermittent catheterization. I know only too well the problems and perils this young man would face for the rest of his life because of a neurogenic bladder. The urologists were very pessimistic about his chances for not requiring catheterization. They had never seen this occur after a spinal cord injury of this severity. And then the impossible happened. I was the other day, Josh no longer required a urinary catheter. I thought of Abaye's Asher Yatzar prayer. Pointing out that I could not imagine a more meaningful scenario for its recitation, I suggested to Josh, who was also a yeshiva graduate, that he say the prayer. He agreed. As he recited the ancient bracha, tears welled in my eyes. Josh is my son. It's an unbelievable story. And it really, I'm recovering from surgery myself, and I have to say, it is something to bear in mind, this idea of seeing a bracha as a way to come closer and to realize what is the source of what you have. I always think like one of the saddest questions somebody can ask is, did I make a bracha already on this or not? Which means that when I make brachot, my brachot are so habitual that I didn't even think, did I make a blessing on this or not before? But when it becomes this mindless place where it's just going through the ritual and not appreciating it, there's no purpose for it, and therefore the first Beit HaMikdash is destroyed. Which is why Rav Dessler explains in Michtav Me'Eliyahu, there's a very puzzling formulation in the Mishnah. Source number 5, the Gemara quoting the Mishnah says, Kol hamitabel Yerushalayim zocheh v'ro'eh b'simchata. Anybody who mourns over Jerusalem merits to see in its joy. Well, I don't know, my grandfather mourned Jerusalem. In fact, my grandfather said Tikkun Chatzot. He's not alive. Did he see Jerusalem? Well, he saw part of Jerusalem rebuilt, but did he see the Beit HaMikdash being rebuilt? 2,000 years we've been mourning for Jerusalem. Have all those 2,000 years merited to see its joy? So Rav Dessler points out that the grammar of this phrase is strange. It should be whoever mourns for Jerusalem will merit to see in its joy. But instead it says, merits to see in its joy. And he suggests that when you start to mourn, when you realize the lack of the Beit HaMikdash, then already you're on track to start to see its joy as well. Realizing what you've lost, realizing that connection that you've lost will allow you to start moving on that track, knowing you're missing something. At least you know that there's a void that you need to work towards to fulfill. In the second Beit HaMikdash, however, we didn't have the Shekhinah present. And what was its greatness? The Maharal says its greatness was because it was a community effort. It wasn't done by Shlomo HaMelech, hiring people and having them come in and build beautiful, gorgeous, wonderful thing. That first Beit HaMikdash was not the model you see when you go on the tunnel tours under the Kotel. That's Herod's Beit HaMikdash that stood for a very brief period at the end of the Second Temple era. The first Beit HaMikdash didn't have, what do we think the menorah looked like in the Beit HaMikdash? What was it made of? Gold. That was the first one. That was the end of the second one. It was either made of wood or tin when they rebuilt the Beit HaMikdash. They were poor, they had nothing, but they came together and they built it literally with their own hands. And that is the value, that community coming together is the way that we achieved the second Beit HaMikdash. And maybe that's why we say at the end of the Amidah, source number 6, after we've taken those steps back, we say, Yehi ratzon milfanecha Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei avotenu, shetivneh Beit HaMikdash b'mehera b'yameinu. That's a great prayer. I just finished the Amidah. It's in place of all the sacrifices. Please rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. V'tein chelkeinu b'toratecha, and give us our portion in your Torah, la'asot chukei ritzonecha u'lavdecha b'levav shalem, to perform the statutes of your will and to serve you with a full heart. What does that mean? How does that fit? What does giving me my portion in Torah mean? Because Torah is universal. It belongs to everybody. when the Beit HaMikdash, when I have that type of a Beit HaMikdash where it's a communal endeavor, each one of us has our portion and our part in it. And I gave you a very sad cartoon. It's not sad. It was sad. It was a poster that was going around my neighborhood. And the question was, what did they wear at Mount Sinai? Okay, which yarmulke, which head covering defines you? They didn't wear any of those. Okay, but it's all of it. It's all of those hats. Okay, so the Beit HaMikdash, the second Beit HaMikdash, was a place where we achieved unity. Does anyone know why the second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed? Sinat Chinam. What does Sinat Chinam mean? Okay, what does baseless hatred mean? Hate for no reason, okay? Hate just because, not because you get in my way, not because you have something I want, not because you're that neighbor that has the loud music or the obnoxious kids or you dress differently, but it's just because I don't want you in my world. You don't belong in, you and I cannot share this world. It comes out of arrogance. And if we have that, if we don't have that sense of community, there's no reason to have a Beit HaMikdash. So once again, the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed. Okay, so let's think about it. Let's try to summarize and then go a little bit deeper. The first Beit HaMikdash I want to suggest to you is characterized by looking at our relationship with God. Okay, we saw Shekhinah manifest. The second Beit HaMikdash is characterized by our relationship with each other. Okay, I just finished the year for my father. And I was thinking about this because I actually prepared part of this on his first yard site. There were two major stages after, God forbid, a death. There's something called aninut, and there's something called avelut. Aninut is the time from when the person passes away until the funeral takes place. What happens during aninut is that you're not allowed to do any mitzvot. You can't do anything. You're supposed to be so involved in preparing for the funeral of your loved one. This is the people that will be sitting. You're so involved in the funeral, in being prepared, that you can't do any mitzvot. You're like in limbo. You can't have what's mitzvot. Mitzvot are my relationship with God. It was like so weird not to make, my brother was like, he says, I can eat before I pray because I'm not praying today. Like it was, but you have no relationship. You're not doing mitzvot. You're not marking your relationship with God. It's almost like that first temple. During this Shiv'ah, what happens? You sit in your home. You separate yourself from society. Society comes to you. But you are separated. You've moved out of the community for those days. And then, because we are a wonderful people, we come together and go into that house of mourning to comfort them. But I think that's the second Beit HaMikdash, that I can't relate to other people. I need to withdraw myself from that. In fact, there's a halakha that you cannot, when you're in a house of mourning, the people who come to visit may not greet the mourner. They have to wait until the mourner starts the conversation. They cannot engage. So that person is choosing to pull themselves back and out. But let's go a little bit deeper. Let's look at the descriptions of Leah and Rachel in Tanakh. And you have them, everybody who wants to look really smart, just look at the source sheets. Okay, how is Leah described? How is Leah described? We hear about her eyes. Okay, we're told that Lavan had, source number 8, Lavan had 2 daughters. The older one's named Leah, the younger one's named Rachel. And the eyes of Leah are rakot. Okay, rakot could mean weak. It could mean tender. The Rashbam says it means beautiful. But we know about Leah's, what's her prominent feature? Her eyes. In some sense, her eyes are something that's noteworthy. And Rachel happens to be very pretty. However, when it comes to Rachel, what's the trait that we think of when we think of Rachel? In the Navi Yirmiyahu, we're told, Kol berama nishma, I hear a voice someplace Ramah or up high or whatever, Nihi bechit hamrurim. Rachel is crying. Rachel is crying for her children. She refuses to be comforted. So Leah is associated with sight, and Rachel is associated with hearing. Well, let's think about that. What's the difference between sight and hearing? Think about perception. When I perceive something visually, I see the whole thing at once. I went to the temple and I had this experience, this enormous sensory experience of everything happening at once. You look at it, you see it, and you perceive it. What about hearing? When I'm saying words to you, your mind needs to process one sound, then another sound, then another sound. Keep them all in your memory until they make sense, until you get to the full word, and then the next word, and the next word, and the next word. Is there anything, well, now we have recordings, but even when you're listening to the recording, it's not tangible in the way that seeing something is tangible. It's a constant, transient experience that you need to work. Your brain needs to constantly process in order for you to get the message. And that is maybe the difference between the first Beit HaMikdash and the second Beit HaMikdash. The first Beit HaMikdash, there was this experience. Leah, you saw it. What you saw is what you got. And by the way, what's the primary medium of learning during the first Beit HaMikdash? Is Torah Shebich Tav, the written Torah that you read. Okay? Second Temple era, what's going on in terms of Torah learning during the Second Temple? Creation of the Mishnah, Torah Sheba'al Peh. Okay? That's oral. That's auditory. So let's think about how that fits with Rachel and Leah and the characteristics of the temple. If Leah is visual, what is missing in us that's missing now when we don't have that visual of the first temple? I think I'm going to suggest to you that what we need to do is we need to work on ourselves in order to be able to achieve the ability to see godliness in everything that we experience. Not just when you have these miracles of there's no flies around this place where they're slaughtering hundreds of animals and the pillar of smoke is always going straight no matter how much wind there is, and the flame on the Mizbeach is never extinguished. But to be able to see Hashem in everything. And there's a beautiful poem by William Blake, because it's Torah and everything, as my students know, okay, Auguries of Innocence. And he says, to see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. To realize that every last thing that you see is miraculous, not just the miracles. To realize that all this comes from Hashem, that would be a way of achieving something that we've lost from the first temple. There's a beautiful quote from Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik says that he's talking about Yirat Shamayim, or Yirat Shamayim, the fear of heaven, or the awe of heaven. And he says, Mahi Yirat Shamayim imlo Ri'iyat Shamayim. Fear of heaven. The word Yirah is a cognate to lirot, to see. If you realize God's presence, then you're in awe of God's presence. So realizing God's presence and becoming more sensitive and letting God into my life and appreciating him, that would be recognition of that first, what we're missing from the first temple. How about the second temple? Okay, it's a process. But let's think about what I'm missing. Remember, we said it was destroyed because of sinat chinam, okay, baseless hatred. How do I correct that? Okay, this is too late in the century to say free love, like free hatred, free love. Okay, that's what hippies had. But it really means looking at other people and trying to relate to them despite our differences. Shammai is very famous, and I gave you the quote there in Pirkei Avot for saying, "Aseh Torah chakva, make Torah study a permanent fixture in your life, and more ma'at v'aseh arbe, say little and do much. V'havei mikabel et kol adam b'sever panim yafot, and greet everybody nicely. Say hello to people." Now, of all people in the Mishnah, who's Shammai's partner? Hillel. Who's the good guy, the friendly guy, the nice guy, the easygoing guy? Hillel. Shammai's the tough guy, right? And he's always so strict and everything. So doesn't it fit that you should say about that Hillel, if I had to say, who said this? Greet everybody happily. Who would you think it would be? Hillel. So why is it that Shammai is the one that's saying, greet everybody happily and be nice to them? Because it's not being nice, it's what you're supposed to do. Okay, saying hello is not going above and beyond. Okay, and I want you to think about that for a minute. Okay, are you nice to people? I don't mean are you nice. I mean, do you greet, you see somebody in the street, do you say hello? In some communities, you walk down the street, everybody says, on Saturday, everybody says Shabbat Shalom, Good Shabbos, whatever the lingo is in that community. In other communities, you say it and they look at you. Are you from out of town? Okay? I always told my children who grew up in New York, the biggest praise for me was when people said your children act like out-of-towners. Because out of town, right? Everybody's nice to everybody else because it's usually a smaller community. But think about that. When you sit down in shul, you sit next to somebody. You never saw them before in your life. Do you say, you're in my seat? Do you say, pass me the siddur? Or do you say, oh, hi. How are you? Who are you? My name is so-and-so. That's part of ahavat chinam. I'm not saying go out and love. Not everybody is lovable. Not everybody is likable. But everybody, you can be nice to people that you meet. But it's a process. Okay? Think about listening. Listening takes time. Listening doesn't only take time, as I'm saying this, that you have to wait to see to where I'm getting to in my sentence. It also takes time to process what the person said and to react to it. How often, and I'm very, very guilty of this, and as I was preparing this shiur, I said, like, I have to highlight this piece on my notes and put it on my refrigerator at home. How often do we interrupt other people and not give them the time to finish their thought? When I interrupt you, what I'm saying is, my time is more important than your time. My saying is more important than your saying. Does anyone here watch Judge Judy? Come on, you can admit it. Okay? I watch this woman, and she is absolutely obnoxious. Here come these people who are trying to have their day in court. Some of them have very far-fetched court cases, but they're trying to have their day in court. And she's like, I'm not interested in what you have to say. I get paid to talk on this show. Don't be Judge Judy. Don't be Judge Judy. Okay? You have to shrink yourself and allow room for other people. I really tried not to do Hasidim, but I guess I'm in Hasidic mode today. The Kutzker Rebbe was known for have like these very short and pithy sayings that really encapsulated a lot. And one of his Hasidim said to him, where is God? And he says, any place you let him in. Think about that. The first Beit Hamikdash represents our allowing God into our lives. The second Beit Hamikdash represents our shrinking ourselves and allowing other people into our lives. Now, the Beit Hamikdash was a place where miracles happened that we unfortunately don't merit to see. We don't merit them. We're not, if we could merit those, then we would have a Beit Hamikdash again. But there was one miracle that I think I want to spend a couple of seconds on, and then we'll try to wrap it up with a story that I just read in a magazine, in a newspaper. One of the 10 miracles that happened at the Beit Hamikdash was Omdim Tzfufim Umishtachavim Rivachim. They would stand, when they would stand in the courtyard of the temple, they would stand very, very crowded. But when it came time to bow, to prostrate yourself, there was enough room for everybody. So think, if I'm standing with 5 people up here, when we bow down, there should be less space. The laws of time and space, I'm not qualified to discuss those, were transcended in some way. But why is it that the miracle occurred when they bowed as opposed to when they stood straight? When I stand erect, I'm me. When I bow down, I am showing that I have a relationship with somebody else, be it Hashem, or if I bow to a person, I'm showing that I have a relationship with somebody else. And that's when the miracle can occur, when I've left room for something else to enter in my life. The first time the Har Bayit is mentioned in the Torah, Har Moriah is mentioned, is Akedat Yitzchak. What does Abraham say to his servants? You stay here. I and the boy will go there. We will bow down and we will come back to you. The first thing that's mentioned about the place of the temple is a place of bowing down, a place of allowing another relationship, not just seeing yourself as independent, but as becoming part of a relationship. So I want to, Jesse gave me like very strict time guidelines. So I want to end with a thought. This is from a shiur that I went to in the Yemei Yun in Herzog. If I were to characterize the first temple as yir'ah, as awe, there were these awe-inspiring events that happened. And the second temple as a place of what should have been love, of ahava, right? Yir'ah and ahava. Look at the bottom of your source sheets. Really, both places were a place of synthesis. Because if I take the letters of Yir'ah and I put them on top of the letters of Ahava, but then I read them downwards, what do I get? I get the same thing. I get Ahava and Yir'ah. It's not a question of one or the other. It's a question of synthesis with an emphasis. Some people like more salt. Some people like more pepper. But you need salt and pepper in the recipe itself. The Beit Hamikdash was a place where Yir'ah, where awe of Hashem, which is a relationship of a servant and a master, was combined with ahava, with love of God, which could be the relationship of a beloved spouse, of a parent to a child. And it really is our task to look at ourselves, to think about how we relate both to God and to each other, to take those lessons of Leah and Rachel, okay, the gift of a relationship or the relationship that we have to work on, the relationship that is miraculous or the relationship that is everyday, to look at those relationships and to think, how can I change? How can I improve? And Be'ezrat Hashem, instead of fasting on Tisha B'Av, we'll all be having a barbecue. Okay, Tiskuli Rot bin Chamat Zion.